The reason why she's doing this is to give, give freedom to white supremacists and those on the far right that are obsessed with these, with idpol, a pass while telling her audience, it's all good. They aren't the concern. Actually, it's the Democrats who don't pay attention to the literal neo-Nazi epidemic that's rising in the country. So for a while now, I've been talking about the Nozbel Vortex and how this sort of weird incestuous brainchild mix of like far right social beliefs and far left economic beliefs would lead to an influx of people who essentially want socialism or something approximating it, perhaps even communism, but only for the hegemonic white European whatever the fuck Nazis like to say. And it's, it's become a real problem. The Buffalo mass shooter, the Nazi guy who wrote his manifesto and dropped it, a few days ago at this point, was a Nozbel. He was. When you look at the economic policies he advocated for in his manifesto, and then his social, he was a Nozbel, not a Nazi. He wasn't like a free market capitalist or a state capitalist or anything like that. He was he was left wing in regards to his economic policies, far right socially. Yeah, Nozbel. This ideology has been getting more and more popular. I think a proponent of it would include Tucker Carlson. He kind of pushes for a very sort of soft Nozbel kind of ideology, it would seem. And, really he shills for whatever's popular among Americans. And what that is right now is this empty populist, appealing to the average American's frustrations when it comes to race, sex, religion, etc., while also appealing to their economic desires. It's very dangerous. It's a very unique form of far-right radicalization that's particularly dangerous because it has a grain of truth to it. Regardless, though, one proponent of this Nozbel Vortex I've been worried about for so long now is an individual by the name of Brianna Joy Gray, who you probably would know by her history as the, I think she was the press secretary of Bernie Sanders' campaign. This is her. She's very stupid. She's just very, very stupid. Her political beliefs are just downright fucking awful, which would surprise you considering her history being on Bernie Sanders' campaign. But she's just very fucking stupid, and she happened to fall in exactly where somebody like her, a Nozbel who can do nothing but appeal to empty populism, ought to be, which is rising. Rising is where you send scumfuck pieces of shit like that, and that's where she is now. So we're gonna go ahead and look at BJG's new segment on rising. The Great Replacement Theory. Is Tucker right? This is Brianna Joy Gray's response to the Buffalo mass shooting, which will be to say, actually, the Great Replacement Theory is correct and the Buffalo shooter wasn't wrong, just like Tucker did. Now, of course, it's not going to outright be saying that. It's going to be dog whistling it. But yeah. Oh, look, Kim Iverson. Yeah. Oh, of course, yeah. We got Kim Iverson, and I'm sure this guy's... I can... If this guy was a decade younger, he'd be a graper.
Brianna, what's on your radar?
Well, of course, as you all know by now, 10 people were murdered in a grocery store in Buffalo, New York by a self-described white supremacist who specifically sought out a predominantly black community and traveled 200 miles to kill black people. True. Among those killed were Roberta Dury, age 32, who loved Whitney Houston, Ruth Whitfield, 86, a devoted grandmother, Celestine Chaney, 65, a breast cancer survivor, and Andre McNeil, 53, who was at the supermarket picking up a cake for his 3-year-old son. Although some are trying to cast this homicidal event as just another murder in the context of a country that is always dealing with the consequences of having more guns than people, racism is not incidental to this story. In a lengthy document left by the killer, he explicitly lamented that because white populations on average have lower birth rates, that white people are making up a smaller and smaller proportion of the global and national population. To him, this is a problem. And his solution?
So at the beginning of any rising segment, it usually starts off like, okay, this is all right, because she's reading a teleprompter. She's reading a teleprompter right now and just sort of saying that, just reciting what happened. It is going to go downhill quickly.
To kill black people with a gun on which he had written, "Here's your reparations." As you've likely heard by now, the idea that white Americans are threatened by demographic changes is known as the Great Replacement Theory. It's a narrative that first gained traction on explicitly white supremacist websites before being mainstreamed by conservative commentators. In the wake of the Buffalo Massacre, Tucker Carlson has come under scrutiny as perhaps the most high-profile purveyor of this narrative. He, of course, does not advocate for physical violence against non-white populations or anyone. In fact, Tucker Carlson is fastidiously
Of course not. He would never, ever advocate for violence against any non-white or non-hegemonic, whatever the fuck, population that he likes. He would never do something like that.
Race neutral in his language, frequently adopting the famous colorblind quote from Martin Luther King and stressing that his interest is in protecting American culture and the American way of life. In fact, Fox News just tweeted this out on Monday. So what does Carlson say that has some liberals accusing him of culpability?
Man, what? I couldn't read that. That was on the screen for half a second. How do I do? What's Tucker Carlson sound like? The American way of life is mediocrity. Judge me by what I do, not by how I can't do it. Not by how I look, by the content of my character, not by the color of my skin. Tucker Carlson. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. I like how they found the most smug possible picture of Tucker Carlson to put alongside a rephrasing of a quote by a socialist far left civil rights activist that would literally be rolling over in his grave at this white nationalist quoting him.
So what does Carlson say that has some liberals accusing him of culpability? Let's take a listen.
Now, I know that the left and all the little gatekeepers on Twitter become literally hysterical if you use the term replacement, if you suggest that the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually.
More obedient voters from the third world. Okay, Tucker.
Let's just say it. That's true. Let's say that again for emphasis because it is the secret to the entire immigration debate. Demographic change is the key to the Democratic Party's political ambitions. In other words, you're being replaced and there's nothing you can do about it. So shut up. I mean, they're trying.
This is the great replacement that he's chilling right now, only instead of saying that a non-white majority is bad because they're non-white, he's saying it's bad because non-white immigrants tend to vote Democrat. It's just doing the great replacement, but saying, but it's not bad because they're brown.
Trying to change the population of the United States. And they hate it when you say that because it's true. Our country's being invaded by the rest of the world. Let me just state unequivocally, the country's being stolen from American citizens as we watch. In political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries.
Now,
legacy Americans. I love the wording.
liberals interpret these statements about, America being stolen, et cetera, as dog whistles, as veiled references to a white way of life. But Tucker Carlson never says that explicitly. And the more liberals accuse him of...
The left accuses Tucker Carlson of saying these things and them being dog whistles for so-and-so, but he never says so-and-so explicitly. Bitch, do you know what a dog whistle is? The point of a dog whistle is so that you never say it overtly. If he said any of these things overtly, he would be no longer the most influential political commentator in America within hours. Yeah, more obedient people, by the way. Yeah, that is, but in that, yeah, come on.
Broadly being racist without being able to articulate why what he said is wrong, the more Tucker gains credibility. And the more he entrenches his coveted victim status. He's primed his audience for exactly that type of "you're a racist" attack. Take a listen.
Quick programming note, as the debate over immigration has risen to the top of the news in recent weeks, a number of figures on the left have denounced this show as racist. It's notable that not a single one of them has offered any evidence to support that slur or even bothered.
So what this is something conservatives will do very, very often. They will say the left is constantly calling us racist, and they can provide absolutely no reason for using that slur. Yes, Tucker Carlson does consider racist to be a slur. He considers it to be a slur against white people. Yeah, he believes that racist is an anti-white slur. That's who BJG is sticking her neck out for right now. No, this is something conservatives love to do all the time. They love to claim the left is calling them racist and has no actual evidence to go by. They don't engage with it, though. Like, Tucker Carlson isn't going to go debate Sam Cedar or Destiny. He's not going to engage with somebody who's got, like, a big fucking, like, folder of all the racist shit he said and answer for it. What do you expect? What he gets to do here is claim that what he gets to do here is spread racist propaganda, which I can, pretty obviously point to why it's racist and where it's racist, to an audience that is overwhelmingly just gobbling up all of the garbage he's spewing to them. And he can, meanwhile, while never ever engaging with his opponents, he can claim that his opponents are too afraid to engage with him. It's easy claps.
To rebut the arguments that we make every night. They just make loud noises about white supremacy and assume that's an argument. Of course, the rest of the media dutifully repeat that.
Tucker's right. Liberals have largely been unspecific about what their concerns are with the Great Replacement rhetoric. But I will be.
Liberals have been unspecific with what their concerns are with the Great Replacement rhetoric? I don't know. Maybe because it radicalizes people to committing violence against minority groups, like we've been saying since before even Charlottesville. People have been warning of this since before Charlottesville, since before the Christchurch shooting, and definitely since before the Buffalo shooter. Oh, before the Buffalo shooter, there was also the El Paso shooter, and before that, there was also the San Diego synagogue arsonist, who those guys wrote manifestos to talk about their far-right white nationalist Great Replacement reasonings as well in their online manifestos. No, the liberals and the left have been very vocal about the specific things they're concerned about when it comes to Tucker Carlson and the Great Replacement rhetoric for a while here.
Tucker claims that his problem with immigration is that it will fundamentally change the voter rolls of the country to benefit Democrats. This is an explicitly political argument, not a racial one, which is why the claims of racism fall flat. But there's no need to.
So there are two forms of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. There's the mask-on version and the mask-off version. The mask-on version is when you say the Democrats are bringing people into America from non-white countries that are more likely to vote Democrat in order to, enable a stronger political stronghold. That is their mask-on version of the Great Replacement theory. The actual, mask-off, what they talk about on 4chan and in the manifestos after they've shot up a synagogue Great Replacement theory is the Jews who control, this is what they believe, the Jews who they think control all of the media, of the, industry and government and whatnot in this country, are importing non-white immigrants here to America to outbreed them and to replace the population and destroy the white majority. That is the mask-off version of it. And she's just either she is playing into and part of, or just falling for the dog whistle.
Evoke racism to find some fault here. Take a listen to this.
Really? The worst attack on our democracy in 160 years? How about the Immigration Act of 1965? That law completely changed the composition of America's voter rolls purely to benefit the Democratic Party. That seems like kind of an assault on democracy, a permanent one. But no, that was a good thing because in the end it helped Joe Biden.
So in that clip,
how is this absolved, Tucker? Let's hear it.
Tucker Carlson argues that the Immigration Act of 1965 was the greatest attack on our democracy since the Civil War. So what was the Immigration Act of 1965? Well, it eliminated the national origins quota system. Before 1965, Southern and Eastern Europeans, Asians, and other non-Western European or Northern European groups were severely limited in their ability to immigrate to this country. The Immigration Act of 1965 undid earlier discriminatory immigration acts like the Chinese Exclusion Act that explicitly barred racial groups, not on any type of merit-based system, but because they were considered to be from culturally or racially inferior countries. Now, the immigration system that Tucker speaks about.
But he said it was bad because how did it benefit Biden or the Democratic Party? And two, Tucker Carlson said that was why it was bad, was because it helped. Okay.
About nostalgically did get some big name approval from across the pond. One notable national leader said admiringly of our system, quote, "The American Union categorically refuses the immigration of physically unhealthy elements and simply excludes the immigration of certain races." End quote. It's a nice compliment, tarnished somewhat by the fact that it's a quote from Mein Kampf. Tucker expressly laments the end of an immigration system that established quotas based on the perceived unworthiness.
Jesus Christ, I wasn't listening for a second, and then I heard her say Mein Kampf, and I was like, what? Jesus. I was thinking about how much I wish I had a weed cart right now.
Of not just non-whites, but Italians, Eastern Europeans, as well as Asians and Africans. Now, Italians and other European groups were considered white prior to the 20th century, but if you think their inclusion on this list makes the list not racist, that's perfectly fine. But it is reflective of a bias that has nothing to do with American ideals, whether these groups share American values or whether they make good citizens. And that's what Tucker says he cares about, the rights of American citizens and the preservation of an American way of life. In the earlier clip, he complained that Democrats were replacing old voters with new voters on the voter rolls. But I'm a little confused about that because all voters are American, definitionally. Only Americans can vote. So we have to ask what makes the new Americans inferior in his eyes to the old Americans. Why are legacy Americans more equal than non-legacy Americans? What makes someone who
I wonder why.
was worked hard and struggled through
American way of life, sound effect. Listen, these are all just dog whistles. It's all, the American way of life preserve. Yeah, it's all about when these types of people talk about making America great again, which is sort of like the, Trump's slogan is pretty indicative of the overall desire of the modern day right. What they're hearkening back to is this sort of like white picket fence classic, like 50s, 40s America, right? Back before Europe and the rest of the world started to recover from the effects of World War II, when America was extremely far ahead economically, and it seemed as though anybody could just, with a high school diploma, get a job that could allow them to support a wife, 2 kids, and have a 2-story 4-bedroom house, right? Like that was like the dream, right? And to a lot of like white conservative Americans, that is their dream. They miss that America. They hear about that America, the America that would have let them have that dream, right? And they miss it, and they want that America. I'm not accusing every single Trump supporter or conservative who believes in that "Make America Great Again" thing of being racist. That would be like pretty dishonest of me and reduction. Like you got to have a little more nuance than that. What I think is happening in a lot of cases are they think back to that age of America and they imagine a life that they wish they had, that prosperous age of America, right? The problem is that age only really existed in America for white people. Not only is there a lot of racism and homophobia and whatnot in the in the right wing here in America, but also when you pick up a phrase like that, which for many right-wing voting Americans might just mean take us back to the American prosperity of economics or whatever, and that's what they're thinking when they vote Republican. For many Republican politicians and for many Republicans, when they hear "Make America Great Again," they aren't just thinking of that golden age in their mind. They also think of all of the racial injustice of that age as well, or the lack of ability for marginalized groups to make their voices heard. They miss the days when all the woke bullshit wasn't in their face, when all of the minorities were just quietly being oppressed and weren't really making a big deal about it. Maybe they aren't fully in favor of the oppression, but they certainly aren't in favor of there being a deal made over it. It really is just a shit show of apathy and political ideology. Here in this case, though, I think Brianna Joy Gray, she knows obviously Rising has a very large like Nozbel following. Like if you've watched like the Sagar and Jetty and Crystal Ball segments on Rising back in the day, you know that like the Hill TV's Rising show has garnered a very large like ultra mega populist Nozbel audience. Listen, if Sean Head watches it, you should be suspect of it. That's all I'm saying. All right. I like Sean Head, but if Sean Head likes a political figure, you should be sussed out right away, or a political outlet, you should be sussed out, and at the very least, be concerned for that political outlet. First and foremost. No, in all seriousness, though, Rising has incurred a massive like Nozbel, like ultra mega populist, Tucker Carlson fan-esque kind of audience, and it's obvious who Brianna is playing to right now.
His difficult immigration process, who has learned the presidents and state capitals and answers to questions that most
I didn't say every single political figure Sean Head likes is bad. I just said that typically if you find out Sean Head likes a political figure, then you should probably be cautious when checking that person out. That's all I'm saying.
Native-born Americans probably can't answer, less worthy of participating in the society than someone whose family came in, let's say, the great immigration wave of the early 20th century. What is it about their character that makes them a bad fit? Now, Tucker is right about something. The Democrats have hoped that changing demographics will inure to their political benefit. Pundits like Steve Phillips, author of...
So, changing demographics are only going to benefit the Democratic Party for as long as the Republican Party continues to advocate against those demographics. Like... I'm sorry, but like Hispanic American voters are so right wing on so many of their positions outside of like the immigration stuff. In many cases, they are really right wing on immigration. If the Republican Party dropped the racism, like so much of the Hispanic American vote would go to them. Like I would be willing to bet most Mexican Americans coming to America, if the Republican Party was less like antagonistic towards them, they'd probably vote Republican. Like the last, and this is from like 2016 or whatever, but like I remember the data showed that like I'm pretty sure most Mexican American immigrants were Catholic and anti-abortion, anti like welfare state, so to say. Like they line up with Republicans in so many things, but it's like the Republicans went on the huge like anti build the wall, the Mexican the evil Mexican South American what was it called what was the big, it's a word for a big group of people, caravan. Remember the big caravan that never showed up, the 5 billion person caravan or whatever? Yeah, like all that shit alienates that demographic. They might be voting Republican if it weren't for the racism.
Brown is the new white, how the demographic revolution has created a new American majority, have traipsed the political circuit for years making this argument. And I hate it. In my view, people like Phillips are part of the rot at the center of the Democratic Party. They are responsible in significant part for its failures and are culpable in part for the rise of replacement theory. In a 2018 article...
Wait, the liberals are responsible for the rise of the Great Replacement theory? Okay.
At The Intercept, I criticized Phillips.
By the way, guys, people, okay, any lefty, quote unquote, who finds an excuse to blame everything, even the problems with Nazis and the far right, on liberals, is a Nozbel and should not be trusted. I'm sorry. But like lefties who, like, the more a leftist hates liberals, the more their brain rots away. It's true. There's a very, very important middle ground balance of liberal hatred and acceptance that liberals are still the ally you have to sit on. Like if you're too far in one direction, you're basically a liberal. If you're too far in the other direction, you start to become a fucking populist, like Brianna Joy Gray. I'm sorry, but every single lefty who I've seen that has found an excuse to blame liberals for the faults of the right ended up being a Nozbel or a Nazi themselves. Key example, Haas. The Haas infrared guy was like grifting as a communist for a while. Now he's doing the far right grift. I think he's buddies with Jackson Hinkle and like the far right figures and whatnot now. And now he's like identifies as far right. Like, yeah, literally all of the people who like, he's friends with Jackson Hinkle. He's like, or not Jackson Hinkle, with, no, he's friends with Hake now. He's friends with Hake. Yeah, he's all friendly with Hake and all those people. Not Jackson Hinkle, he's been friends with for a while. Hinkle's like a Nozbel as well. Yeah, he's friends with Hake, the Jesse Lee Peterson guy. Yeah, like these people are always lying about their political beliefs. They're always like the ultra populist shit always leads to the Nozbel far right bullshit. Always.
For arguing that America's growing non-white population is key to the Democratic Party's success, and that, quote, Democrats should not waste money appealing to white swing voters. The Democratic Party is useless today in part because it's been following Phillips' advice. For years now, the party has completely abandoned any effort to persuade voters of any race to pass the policies they actually want, or even to speak with him with a modicum of respect.
Wait, that's really weird because she just said two different things. The book that she was citing said the Democratic Party has forsaken the desires of white voters in exchange for the desires of brown voters. And then Brianna Joy Gray said, that book is correct. The Democratic Party today doesn't appeal to any voter group of any demographic. Wait, but that's not what the book said. The book said the Democratic Party has forsaken white people, and you're saying, yeah, the book's right. The Democratic Party's forsaken everybody. Okay.
Part of the reason is that advisors like Phillips, a senior advisor at top liberal think tank Center for American Progress, believe that white votes are a deplorable lost cause. And non-white voters, they think, will inevitably vote for Democrats, no matter how much the Democratic Party abuses them. Remember when Joe Biden told black voters in 2020
I will say, this is a problem with the Democratic Party. The expectation that non-white voters will just automatically vote for the Democratic Party is not true and is an aspect of modern liberal political strategy that I'm not a big fan of. That I'll agree with.
That if they didn't vote for him, they ain't black. That was just the Democrats saying out loud what so many of them believe, that non-white votes belong to them. They don't need to be earned.
Also, that was probably a gaffe from Biden. I don't believe that he actually meant that black people who don't vote for him aren't black. I'm gonna take a wild guess and say that was probably Biden's melting brain and not Biden literally saying black people who don't vote for him aren't black. But it did make for a fantastic meme.
But they were wrong. As I wrote back then, though much is made of the browning of America, the country is still 70% white, and electoral strategies that are wholly dismissive of that population set themselves at an unnecessary disadvantage. America's browning is largely attributed to the fact that Hispanics constitute the largest growing ethnic group in the country, but a majority of Hispanics identify as white, and 1/3 continue to support Donald Trump.
Yeah, as I said before, if it weren't for the Republican Party's racism, Hispanic Americans would be corralling to Trump and the Republican Party. Like, dude, I'm sorry. Like, maybe you haven't met like a lot of Hispanic families, but they're very conservative. They're like, in most cases, more conservative than the average American white family. Like, I would be willing to bet the average Hispanic, non-white Hispanic family is more conservative on most policy issues than she said it. Well, I don't know if it's more conservative than most white Americans, but I'm willing to bet that the average non-white Hispanic immigrant American on policy issues falls more right-wing, more traditional, etc., than the average white American family. Because, as far as I can tell, at least it seems, particularly Mexican American families, especially first generation, tend to be more like traditional and way more together, like way more like familial, I guess. That's been my experience, at least. Haas might actually be an asset. He's a lolcow who's a gift to the left. Yeah, Haas's existence and being like on the right and doing what he does makes like us look good, so I guess you can't really complain.
The irony is that Phillips's theory hasn't borne out. Democrats have so totally abandoned the working class, voters of all colors, that growing numbers of non-whites are looking for alternatives. Among Congress members, Republicans are the more vocal anti-interventionists right now. Marjorie Taylor Greene is out here outflanking squad members on the absurdity of giving aid to Ukraine, while American
Marjorie Taylor Greene is outflanking the squad. Okay, Jewish space lasers lady.
baby starve. And Latinos are an important part of the Republican base. Now, this reality undermines Tucker's argument. Although he's right that Democrats hoped immigration changes would help them politically, they haven't. Not really.
Remember, guys, back in 2016, the way that the right gained as much prominence as it did in the first place was by making their opinions look as though they weren't right-wing. You guys remember that, right? The way the right gained its initial biggest foothold during like the Gamergate era was convincing an entire, an entire population of people online that these ideas weren't even super right-wing or political to begin with. Perhaps even that these ideas were left-wing. Do you remember the trend of saying that Trump was more left-wing than Hillary? That fake quote that would be like shared around of Trump saying, "Yeah, if I ever ran, I'd run as a Republican because they're so stupid. They'd vote for me, and I'd basically be a Democrat." That fake quote that never actually happened, that ended up like spreading across the internet like wildfire, and people believed it in droves. Left-wing people believed it in droves, thinking that Trump was actually more left-wing than Hillary. This is the kind of shit they're trying to pull here.
Not as much as people thought. Tucker doesn't have a strong electoral argument against immigrant populations who, on the whole, are more politically conservative and more religious than native-born Americans. And a slight liberal bias among first-generation immigrants disappears after a generation or two. They're ripe for Republican picking. And without the electoral case against immigration, I think it's fair to ask a hypothetical, as Tucker often does. What could be motivating him to see immigration as such an existential threat?
I don't know.
Whose existence is really imperiled right now? The white American lifespan is declining right now for the first time in American history. The opioid pandemic is a scourge made worse by the COVID pandemic and the lack of universal health care. Wages haven't kept up with inflation, and both corporate parties are aligned against raising the minimum wage, even though we haven't had a minimum wage raise for the longest period in American history. And even though Americans have
raising the minimum wage is not a Thanos snap solution to even a fraction of the problems that lefties have with modern American politics. Raising the minimum wage is it's not that easy of a solution.
Never worked harder for less. When Carlson focuses his ire on corruption by elites, he's right on the nose. But the fact that he fully understands that it's elite capture that's causing so many Americans to hurt right now makes it difficult for me to understand how he thinks that—
Is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour even that popular of a policy right now? How popular is that among Americans? Most Americans support a $15 federal minimum wage. Let's see. 62% of Americans support a $15 federal minimum wage. That's a majority. Most opponents want a more modest increase. Oh, okay. Wait. Among 38% who oppose raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, what percent though? Oh, 71%. 71% of the 38% that oppose say the minimum wage should be increased, but to less than $15 an hour. Well, that's... I get that's not even the okay. And then in favor is 62%. Okay, dope. Nice. 15 is still too low. The issue with, okay, the reason why it's dumb to just raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour is because in some areas it solves the problem and in some areas it doesn't, right? Like where I live right now, I don't think I could live my current lifestyle on $15 an hour. My rent alone is $20,000 a year, and my food costs for me, my girlfriend, my cat are probably like, I'd ballpark $1,000 to $1,500 a month, $1,200 a month on average, and that's not even counting the rest of the bills. Like here in Southern California, $15 a month would have me living in a box on the side of the road, making enough to at least buy food, and whatnot, and food and clothes. There are no apartments you can afford for $15 a month in my area right now. I've looked. I've been looking for a cheaper place because this place is so fucking expensive. I can't afford it. Like I'm always broke. I'm so fucking broke because my rent and bills drain all of my income. And I've looked for cheaper places. They just don't exist out here. $15 minimum wage isn't enough in some places. It seems like the best way to deal with the minimum wage problem is to enact policies that basically scale the minimum wage to living cost in an area, right? Bumfuck Kansas, where you can get a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment for $800 a month pre-pandemic. It probably wouldn't be as necessary to raise minimum wage to $15 an hour. You're just going to bankrupt the economy in that area. But like in a place like California, maybe like LA, maybe the local minimum wage can be higher, and maybe policies for businesses to be supplemented if they can't afford to pay that minimum wage higher by the government, state or federal, can be done. I don't know. It just seems like a more nuanced and way more complicated policy is what has to be implemented in order to solve that problem. Just saying minimum wage is $15 a month or $15 an hour now doesn't, and you know what it also doesn't fix? All of the homeless people that live in my city that couldn't go out and get a job right now if they tried their fucking hardest. I talked about this on stream yesterday, but I was on a bike ride and there was this lady. I like stopped and I took a drink, and there was this lady, homeless lady, walking down the street in basically in rags, screaming to herself like shut up, like angrily, and like she's clearly having some kind of mental episode. And it's like our society has failed this woman, and there are millions, I think, of homeless people in situations just like hers, and upping minimum wage doesn't solve her problem. She's not on welfare, and she's not able to go get a job interview. She can't go get a job interview. Other policies need to be implemented to solve that problem as well. But it gives more money to welfare by raising it. That is true. Yeah, when you raise, well, the more, okay, so the idea behind it, the theory behind it is the more money you put into welfare, the more people that can work, and have access to jobs and actually pay into welfare, the more money there is to pay for it with. So social programs do tend to pay for themselves as long as they're implemented properly. America hasn't had the best track record when it comes to implementing social safety net systems.
That a relatively small and powerless immigrant group deserves as much focus as the billionaires stalling our wages, poisoning our baby food, and ruining the country. And focusing on small, powerless individuals rather than big corporations in control is dangerous, literally. We need to be clear about what people like the Buffalo shooter are talking about when he talks about the Great Replacement. They're not just talking about the natural immigration and population trends that have existed since the first immigrants walked out of East Africa. To replace something is to put something new in the place of something old. It implies the old thing is gotten rid of, not simply added to. The threat suggested by Great Replacement isn't just low white birth rates or average immigration rates. It's something more pernicious, something akin to white genocide. And in fact, the Buffalo murderer describes the declining birth rate as, quote, mass genocide. And genocide is defined as the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group.
Please do not defend the replacement part of this. Is she going to find a way to say, well, actually, Tucker's right about the replacement part? Is she going to find an excuse to, take Tucker's side on all of it? I hope she, at the very least, on one of these 3 points, takes a reasonable position.
That's not what immigrants do. That's what the Buffalo shooter did. He hunted down black people so they could be replaced with so-called legacy Americans, a term I find kind of funny given that few communities have as deep historical roots in America as black Americans. After all, the Atlantic slave trade was abolished in 1808, meaning that the American descendants of slaves arrived here sometime before then.
She's being based so far.
We predate the huge wave of European immigrants that arrived in this country between 1880 and 1920. 20 million immigrants arrived during those 40 years, nearly double the number of Africans forcibly enslaved and sold into bondage in the Americas over the span of 400 years. At this country's founding, Black Americans constituted 20% of the population and comprised 16.5% after the Civil War. But that didn't last long. By 1920, at the end of the great wave of European immigration, the original racial fabric of this country had changed. The legacy Americans, Black Americans, had largely been replaced. Now, I'm not sincerely arguing for a Black version of replacement theory. I'm drawing this historical analogy to make a point.
Wait, but that's not how it works there either. In neither of these cases was it necessarily replacement. So, okay, there are two possible scenarios in which replacement can take place. Replacement can take place when an immigrant or a new person is born as a person who previously existed in that nation. An immigrant comes to the country, or a new person is born of a certain demographic, who, as somebody from another demographic, dies. So essentially, effectively, that person's been replaced. The thing is, some white person doesn't die every single time an immigrant comes to America or a non-white baby is born in America. That's not how it works. The argument being made is that white birth rates are lower than non-white birth rates in America, so non-white babies are being born at a faster rate than white babies are being born, and so as white people die, then there will be more brown people. Now, that's on its own not even a bad thing. They make it sound like really scary and bad, but like that's not, it's not though. It's just people living their lives. The reason for why white birth rates have dropped though, that is cause for concern. It seems though that the most likely cause for that right now is a mix of millennials not wanting to have kids. And millennials specifically seem to be the cause of it, white millennials not wanting to have kids. And the main cause of that is a mix of things. Most of it tends to be poverty. It seems like poverty has led to a number of things. One is depression. Legitimately, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, besides like Zoomers, aren't millennials like the most depressed generation? Like the most issues with insomnia, depression, suicidal ideation, suicide, stuff like that. Like, it seems like that's like millennials and Gen Z, like the newer the generation, the higher the rates of depression, suicide, etc., it seems. And a lot of that seems to stem from the fact that, economically speaking, America, and I am speaking about America here broadly because I'm American, is getting less and less easy to live in. Like, legitimately, right now, maybe it's just me, but like, my mom had it pretty tough compared to her mom, but she didn't have to, when she was raising me, the chicken breast that she was buying at the grocery store was probably $3 cheaper than it is right now with all this fucking inflation and COVID and everything that's been happening. Things have just been getting progressively tougher economically, it seems, and that's led to depression, literally. And it seems like, I think we've been seeing like the data coming out about how millennials are not dating as much and they're not like having as much sex. Kind of makes sense when you consider that. And even millennials that are in relationships and, millennial age right now is like the age you'd be expecting to be having the most kids and be buying houses and starting families. That demographic right now, even when they're in relationships, aren't choosing to have kids. They don't have the money for it. Or even if they do, they're scared that something's going to happen and they're not going to have the money for it anymore. Even though the middle class is shrinking, if you're middle class in America, that doesn't mean you're comfortable economically. When you're middle class in America, that still means you're an emergency or two away from bankruptcy, essentially. So you may still not want to have kids just because let's just focus on careers and so we can actually retire. Maybe they want to retire instead. For many Americans, for many American couples, if you're like a millennial and you're in that age and you're like thinking about starting a family, you might have two options on the table for you right now. Have kids and start a family, or retire before you die. Many millennials are now choosing the no kids and have enough money to retire before I die route. Because work fucking sucks, and they'd rather be able to save up as much money as possible and reach financial stability so they can retire and stop working instead of having kids and continue to work so they can support a family. That is why white birth rates are going down. And then you may ask, why are non-white birth rates up then? Well, look at the economic situation. Non-white families aren't having kids because they don't have the economic confidence to have kids. Non-white families in America, it would seem, specifically like Black and Hispanic families in America, are having more kids because, yes, they may have less money demographically, but they also don't have enough money for access to contraception. Not nearly at the rate that like white people in America do. Or to access to like, you know, proper sex education, or access to the proper facilities to engage in safe sex. It's less likely to result in pregnancy. And less likely to be able to have a family that's going to be able to support them when they do get pregnant, thus resulting in a continuous cycle.
Point. The idea that rapidly changing demographics can politically disadvantage a population is nothing new, nor is the idea that some white Americans are so threatened by changing demographics that they feel empowered to murder blacks, Jews, Latinos, Asians, and Native Americans. Elites in this country have always understood that the best way to distract the public from their looting of wages and public wealth is to pit people against each other, to divide them up by their differences. Mainstream news pundits on both Fox and MSNBC would like to use racial strife as a deflection from core economic issues that hurt working people of all ethnic and national origins.
So now what she's going to say is that it's actually the left and the right that are dragging our attention towards race, and she's not, I don't know if she's going to say it, but id poll, when what we really need to focus are the economic issues. The reason why she's doing this is to give freedom to white supremacists and those on the far right that are obsessed with these, with id poll, a pass, while telling her audience, it's all good, they aren't the concern. Actually, it's the Democrats who aren't making the minimum wage $15 an hour that are a real concern. Don't pay attention to the literal neo-Nazi epidemic that's rising in the country. It's the Democrats, and they're not making the minimum wage $15 an hour that's causing the Buffalo shooting to happen.
That's why it's less important to focus on whether Tucker can be blamed for what happened in Buffalo, and focus more on why there has been a proliferation of hateful rhetoric that makes working Americans see other powerless Americans as the source of their troubles. So much so that some folks resort to murder. We can't let this discourse replace important conversations about how we make this country live up to its ideals.
I see what she did there.
For all Americans, together. And so I know that's a lot, but the point I just really wanted to make was that the conversation about Tucker, I think, is a little bit of a distraction from what the broader conversation about great replacement is doing, and how much focus is being put on immigrants and immigration in a way that hasn't gotten enough scrutiny.
Yeah, I think the best way to stop the right from talking about the great replacement theory is just to point out what several of the things you pointed out in this radar, which is that it is not true that bringing in a lot of immigrant voters necessarily harms the GOP. As you pointed out, a lot of Hispanic voters, actually, especially second generation, end up having conservative views. The Republican Party is recasting itself as a party for working class people, not just for white working class people, but for working class.
No, it's not. No, the Republican Party is getting more and more radical and more on like the racialized and more like straight white cis het, like whatever, pro that than it's been in a while, it's gotten more on that shit. Like the Republican Party is, I'm not sure if it's becoming the Nozbel Party just yet. We'll see.
Class people, and it is gaining regard among a lot of categories of workers and ethnic groups. And Trump did really.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This guy looks like a. I don't mean to be rude. I don't know who this guy is. Maybe he's like left wing and he's super cool or whatever. But he looks like a synthezoid. He looks like some sort of like robot in a human skin suit. There's just something wrong about him that doesn't seem right. He seems like he's been programmed. He doesn't seem like a real human. I'm gonna keep my eye on him.
Well in southern Texas, in Florida with specific immigrant groups. The most hostile people to the GOP agenda are affluent white people in this country. So
legacy Americans.
Right. So that's true. And Tucker knows that because he rails against a lot of the college campus type people, some of the people I criticize a lot. So that's I think that's there are many knocks against the great replacement theory, but that
I do love the idea that like it's actually the affluent white people that vote left that are yeah, Jesus. A synth from Fallout? Yeah, we'll see. In 1,000 years, we'll see if if he looks like that one synth investigator guy from Fallout 4. Why does he talk in the same Fox News cadence? I think it's because when it comes to news political commentary and you're a guy, this is like how you're supposed to talk. It's just that's like the TV presentation voice. This is how, like, I don't know, I'm a streamer. I can talk and behave and do whatever I want as long as it's entertaining enough for people to watch me and pay me enough to do this again tomorrow. When you're on TV, I guess there's a very certain mannerism set you have to fall into.
I think that should be the one that hopefully would persuade the GOP that it can win with immigrants. It's doing it.
It's doing it.
Well, I think immigration is always just going to be a hot button political topic. So I don't know if there's any getting rid of it, if there's any getting rid of railing against it. One group is going to rail against it, or the other group is going to, because they view it as, as being used as a way. I mean, not to use the term great replacement, but certainly they see it as a threat, as a political threat, saying, well, the other political party is trying to import in people that are aligned with them. And I think that argument is as old as time. I don't think that is new to Tucker Carlson or new to the climate that we're in right now politically. And if it weren't immigration, it would be something else. And it is other things.
Kim Iverson is right wing, by the way.
Right? I mean, we're seeing constantly this pointing the finger, as you mentioned, Brianna, not focusing on the real issues that are causing the strife in middle-class America, the stuff that's actually harming.
What I love about this type of content, and I think this is where we can leave it off because there's not really going to be anything of substance in the last couple minutes or last minute of this video. Notice what they're saying here is it's really like the most vapid and empty attempts to appeal to the like average American, quote unquote, right? Like they never really. The only actual example of a policy to help the American people that was brought up in this entire segment, supposedly a policy to help the American people the Democrats won't pass, is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And that alone isn't even like a great policy. That alone isn't even like a very good policy to be advocating for in the first place if you're trying to solve the issue of, people not having a living wage. The rest of it is all just vague. Like, oh, the things that the Americans want, they aren't doing it. Am I right, average American viewer? Keep on watching us. We want what you want. And we're not we want what the average American viewer wants, and it's the Democrats aren't doing it. Like, I don't know, it just feels so empty. Like, they just keep saying that over and over again, like it's an attempt to grab the appeal of the disenfranchised average American, I don't know. Anyway, if you enjoyed this segment, please consider leaving a like. If you're watching live, you can also like the stream. That's always appreciated. And drop a like if you're watching after the fact when it goes up as its own video. And of course, if you want to see more from me here on YouTube, make sure to drop a subscription and ring that bell icon next to the sub button if you haven't already, so YouTube does actually tell you when I go live or upload a new video. And of course, if you want to see more from me on the internet, you can follow my social medias, which are all linked down below in the description, including my Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and fan Discord. And if you want to if you want to support me financially, you can donate, subscribe, or gift a sub on my website, xanderhall.com/live. Or support me financially through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, or Patreon. But with all that said, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and have a good one.